Hello, in this video I'm going to show you how to make a landscape in Unity, and I've launched Unity Hub here because that seems to be the way Unity allows you to pick which version you want to launch. So if I go to new, you can see I've got two different installs here. I'm going to pick the most up-to-date install and just select that. And I'm going to make a new project using that version of Unity. So if you're running this at home, then you're going to have this at home, and I just want what you see in the video to match what you see on your desktop. So I'm going to say that I want a 3D project, and let me give this thing a name. I'll call it like terrain demo. And for the location, you probably want something in your documents folder. I think it defaulted for me just to users Evan. You want to put this thing in like, users, whatever, documents, Unity 5 projects, something like that. I wouldn't just dump it in your user folder. So that's all you need. 3D project, give it a name. I'm going to call mine terrain demo. You can just call yours terrain if you want, and then just set the path and then click create. So here's our default Unity scene. We have a camera and a directional light, and that's about it. So let's go import the assets that we'll need to actually make textures and water and trees and grass and all that. Now, Unity bundles all of that into one massive asset called the standard assets, and we don't really need all of it. We just need a small chunk of the stuff that's in there. And you can get to that by going to the Asset Store from the Window menu. So I'm going to go to Window and then select Asset Store. That'll bring up the Asset Store here. And you can tear off these tabs and they'll float, although I always have trouble getting it to kind of actually, not dock somewhere weird that I don't want. And if you search on standard assets in here, this is the one you want. That looks like kind of a plastic model kit. That's the one you want. And if you click on that, if you have not downloaded this yet, this will probably say download instead of import. So click download, it'll download, then click import. So that'll allow us to bring in the standard assets. So I'm going to click on that. Okay, so that actually took a little bit to decompress, and I just kind of edited that out. Now, what we have here is way more than what we want in our project. We don't want to import all this stuff. It's just going to waste space on our hard drive. So I'm going to select none here. I'm going to deselect all of this stuff. And what we want to do is scroll down through this, and we want to find the environment package. So we'll start with the environment package because we know we'll need that, and then later we'll probably need the characters and the first-person controller, all that, so we can run around our scene. But we're just going to start off with the environment package, and I guess I'm getting pretty close. It's about halfway down. There's the environment right there. Just click on environment and say import, and then just that subset of the standard assets is going to get imported into our project. So now we've imported that subset of the standard assets, and now I can just close this tab. I don't need it anymore. And if we want to go back and import more stuff out of there later, we can, and we will. So there's our now we have our assets here, and if we actually kind of go down here into all prefabs, now you can see we've got all sorts of other stuff in here from the standard assets. We've got trees and textures, and that was the whole point of importing the standard assets. So now let's go add a terrain object to our scene. So if I go up here to game object and I select 3D object, I can select terrain as one of the options, and I will get a terrain plane. And the terrain plane is fairly enormous. We don't need anything nearly this big. So we'll scale it down. Now, just like in 3ds Max, where you have move, rotate, and scale, we have that too here in Unity. We have move, rotate, and scale. However, we don't scale terrain. There's a different way to change the size of the terrain. And if I select the terrain, you'll see over here there's kind of like a terrain component, and I've got some options here. This last one here, terrain settings, that's a gear. And if I click on that, I can change some of the parameters on the terrain. So let's do that. So what I want to do is see the terrain width and the terrain length. That is Unity is in meters, so that's pretty big. That's like 3,000 meters. So we really don't need that much terrain. Let's put in. I'm going to put in like 250 for the width and the length. There we go. And you can see now our terrain is more manageably sized. Like, it's not super enormous. I mean, it's better to have like a small amount of kind of well thought out terrain than just some sprawling landscape that doesn't, a player has to just kind of traipse around for no real reason. Okay, so now we've sized our terrain. Now, the next thing you want to do when you make terrain is raise all the terrain up. And that's because the terrain can't be negative. You can't have like a negative height. So if you want to cut down into the terrain, like to make a lake or a river or a stream or something, you want to raise the terrain up so then you can lower it later. And so that's called flattening the terrain. So let's go flatten our terrain here. And in this version of Unity, they have now they've rearranged all the buttons, and it is now hard for me to find the stuff that I'm used to finding, but I think I can manage it here. So let's see if we've got on the paintbrush here. We've got set height. Let's look at set height here under the paintbrush, and you can see that our terrain is at the height of 0. What we want to do is let's set this to 100. We'll raise it up 100 units, and then we'll say flatten all. And you're like, oh no, where'd the terrain go? Well, it just went up there, right? So the terrain got raised up. Let's click. If you double click on any object over here in the hierarchy panel, it'll kind of get centered into the scene. And our terrain is still there. Like, there's, everything is fine. The only difference is we've raised it up, and now so we can now kind of carve down into it. All right, so let's go make some topology on this terrain plane that we've just added into our scene. And we can do that again using the paintbrush here. And let's look at, we've got raise or lower terrain. Let's try, what have we got there? Okay, so what we can do is we can pick a brush and then click on the terrain, and it will kind of raise the terrain up in the pattern of the brush. And if we hit shift click, it will lower the terrain in the pattern of the brush. So that's how we're going to actually make the terrain all bumpy. And let's kind of pick like a a brush there, like one of these shapes, and we can play with the brush size. And the opacity is how strong, like how quickly how much the terrain reacts to the mouse being over it. So that's actually pretty huge right there. Let's shrink down there we go. That's looking a little better. And so if I crank the opacity and I click, you see it immediately just kind of spikes up, right? So if I lower the opacity, you can see it's a much more gentle effect. So what you kind of want to do, I'm just holding the left mouse button down, and you always kind of want to have the mouse button moving. Oops, what happened there? You always kind of want to have the mouse button down, otherwise it's really easy to kind of overdo the terrain in Unity and have really kind of crummy looking terrain, or terrain that just looks like some kid was just playing in a sandbox. So the trick the pros will tell you is start, like if you want to make a mountain or something, start with a wide brush, just kind of click around, and then kind of go to a smaller brush, kind of click in the middle there. That's looking a little more realistic. And now you can go to a really like a smaller brush, and you can kind of make some streaks coming off the side. Right, so that's how you make your terrain, or at least give it some textures. Now, imagine that we wanted to have a lake in our scene. How would we do that? Well, we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to hold down the shift key while we click. So let me kind of pick, make the brush just a little bit larger. Maybe I'll pick like, a circular brush like that, and I'll make the opacity pretty low. Maybe I'll shrink the brush size just a little bit. And now if I hold down the shift key, you can see it is now syncing where I click. And the reason that the terrain is allowed to sync is because we raised it up in the first place. So again, I mean, that's kind of a pretty extreme, I mean, it's more blunt, or it's more I guess it's more severe than I kind of was hoping for. I was hoping it wouldn't kind of sync quite so dramatically, but again, I could also play with the opacity, and I can go back and fix that if I really cared. This is just kind of a demo, but there you go. So if I change the opacity, that's kind of what I wanted. So again, you don't want you want to make your terrain changes really really smooth, really slowly, really gradually. You don't want to do stuff like that, like kind of earthquakes. That's like a kid playing in a sandbox. Okay, so now let's all right, so we've got our topology there. Let's go, since we've got the water prefabs right here, let's go throw some water in our scene here. And if we look through into the prefab section, prefabs are kind of clonable objects. We can take these and just drag them into the scene. So let me kind of use the move tool here. Let me take one of these water planes. Let me just drag it into my scene, and I can kind of lower it down below the terrain, and I can scale it. So remember, I've got move, rotate, scale. I can grab the scale tool and I can pull this thing along a different axis, right? And now maybe I want to raise it up just a little bit. So now I've created a lake. All right, so that's pretty good. All right, let's call that the end of this video. In the next video, what I'll show you how to do is put textures on the terrain, and then maybe we'll get into some trees and grass, and we'll get some sky in here too.